drain pan, and I have no idea why they put such a tiny little hole for the plug. So I just opened it up a little bit with my screwdriver. When I used this initially, it would pull on here and it would just stream, so then you had to put the plug in the drain of your pan and then wait for this to drain. It's a really dumb idea. This should be a really big hole. 14 millimeter on that drain plug. The guy who did this before me did not use a seal, so it's been leaking and dripping. So we're going to use I use a 14 millimeter socket here, a little extension, or you can use a box open end wrench. And I always put a drip pan, obviously, and then I put these pig mat, because see what I mean? How this, so you need to enlarge the hole depending on what type of drain pan you use. You need to enlarge it because it'll overflow. Nothing like changing the oil in the rain. It's just a soft rain. So yeah, we wait for all this to drain out, and I enlarged that hole because the one that came with it is a tiny little, I don't know, 1/4 inch maybe. And so basically it was, you had to put the plug in, drain a little bit, let it drain this pan, and then put the plug back in. Really dumb design. I have no idea why they have such a dinky little hole. But so yeah, we're draining the oil now. So this mess is what happened when they didn't use a good enough gasket. So this is the one that came off of it, and you can see on the edge there, there's no that's where it was leaking from. So we have a new washer, plus I'm going to use some 3H gasket sealer, aviation gasket sealer. So here's the plug, and I always inspect the threads, make sure the threads aren't cross or stripped, and obviously they are. If they are, then you want to replace it. So the drain plug looks good, and then I always hit it with some brake cleaner here. Always pretty much drench it and then wipe it off with a clean rag, and then we'll put a new washer on it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to obviously put a new washer on. This is the old one. I'm going to put a new washer on, and then I'm going to use the Permatex Aviation 3H gasket sealer. This is for aviation. This is the best stuff, gasket sealer. If you need to take it off, you just use brake cleaner to clean it off. But this is for airplanes. Form a gasket liquid sealant. It's the best stuff. I've used this stuff for over 30 years. I love it. I put it on anything that requires a gasket. I do not use like Forma gasket, you know, that the RTV. I hate RTV. I use this. It's real sticky, so I'm wearing gloves. But and then when I'm done with the cap, I always squirt a little bit of WD-40 on these cap threads so that it's easier to clean off the bottle. But I'll paint the washer, paint both sides of the washer with a nice healthy coating of that, and hopefully it'll stop this from leaking. So I also squirt a whole bunch of brake cleaner around that area, and then take some paper towel and clean all that up. I use about 2 cans of brake cleaner, not for that, but in total. And then I stuff some blue rags up in there and clean it all up and spray it with brake cleaner. As you can see here, I really coated it on. Kind of sloppy, but I just don't want this thing to... And I can always clean this off with brake cleaner. And so we're just going to put it hand tight, and then of course tighten it just enough. Maybe 15 foot-pounds. Not really sure, but just snug. You don't want to strip this out. Okay, the oil filter. I have no idea why in the heck they put the damn oil filter. You have to reach all the way in there. I like this car, and Toyotas are usually pretty decent, but on the small block Chevys and the LS engines, it's right by the pan. This, you have to snake your arm in there. I use K&N air filter, so it's a 1-inch nut, but you have to either snake your arm in there or take off the skid plate. And then usually what happens is I stuff a ton of 3 or 4 rags underneath there, because it always leaks when I'm taking it out. Some people said puncture a hole in it, but it's just messy pulling that out, and that's a 1-inch K&N, so I can pull it off there. But why in the hell did they put that like that? That to me is the dumbest idea, but it is what it is. It's just a dumb idea, because you have to replace those, and I guess a lot of people take off the skid plate, but that to me is just idiotic. Pushed a bunch of towels underneath there because it always drains, and then I'm going to shoot some brake cleaner and a clean rag and clean that up, and then we're ready for the new filter. So obviously I thread it on by hand, and then once it touches or makes contact, I tighten it about 3/4 of a turn by hand. I don't use a wrench to install it. So I use Mobile One Advanced Full Synthetic High Mileage 530. I clean out my funnel. I spray it out with brake cleaner, and then wipe it down, and then of course dry it out. Make sure there's no debris or dirt in there, and then I fill it up gently, and then check it periodically to make sure I'm not overfilling it. I think this is 5 1/4, but I gradually put 5 in, and then check it. Well, put another half of that, add in, and check it periodically after the 5. Also, this is obviously the fill cap. I inspect the threads. I look for any burnt, and I also smell it for any burnt deposits. I check the threads, and then I wipe it clean with a rag, and then spray it with a little brake cleaner just to clean it all up. So with an oil change, I always change my air filter, and this time using a Toyota, I usually use whatever's at the local parts store, either Fram or the Parts House brand. I actually got this on Amazon, and it was slightly cheaper than the house brand at the local AutoZone. So just out of routine maintenance, I just changed the filter, run with oil filter, and then I also check the battery here. We got some corrosion here, so some baking soda. We'll clean that up, and then I will hit that with the hose. And then I check the belts. Let's check the belts down here, and belts are looking good. I don't see any cracks on the ribbing. That's the one. That's the alternator belt. And then it's hard to see with the camera. Let me flip it. I don't see any cracking or any cracks in the belts. Belts look good. Always check the hoses, squeeze them, check the connection, make sure it's not leaking. That's the upper hose. And then of course check the lower hose. Flashlight down there. And then I also look for any, check the brake fluid. I also check to make sure there's nothing leaking or broken. The cap's missing off of my AC, but that's no issue. And I check to make sure there's nothing leaking. Manifold, there's no leaking or worn parts. And that's my heater hose. The lower on actually, and I don't see any leaks or any wear. This is the fuel. These look good. No cracks on the hoses. No cracks there. This looks good. Everything's a little dusty, but overall looks good. I also squirt some mass airflow sensor fluid in there. Without taking it all apart, but I try to squirt some in there and move it all around, up and down. And that'll clean the mass airflow sensor. Because I always, yeah, right in there. I usually squirt some of this mass airflow cleaner in there, and without taking it all apart, because I could take this all apart, but this is, but I try to get to here. I could take this all apart, but I keep it up and spray a little bit in there. That seems to get me by. Now I did notice, this is the first time I've actually used Toyota parts. So I noticed that the pleats are a little bigger. So on the right is the Toyota, on the left is a Fram. And I noticed the pleats, and it fits a little better in the housing. And I got this on Amazon. You can get it anywhere. And it was actually a little cheaper. I usually buy all my parts like a week or two ahead of time, and I have a couple on spare, because when I get in the mood I want to do the job. I don't want to spend half the day in the parts store on a Saturday. So this is the Fram. As you can see, the pleat size, these are a little bit bigger pleats, so I'll be curious. This is the first time I've actually used the Toyota brand. I also checked the radiator fluid. This is a brand new cap a couple years ago, so. And the overflow, just make sure the gasket, there's no holes in it, there's no leaks, there's no cracks, there's no corrosion down there. I always check the inside with the light, make sure there's no corrosion buildup. I don't see any in the radiator. It looks pretty clean. Let's replace the cap. Make sure it's snug. And I check the overflow. And I check the line, which is here. It's hot and cold. And we could probably add a little bit of fluid. Not too overly concerned. Probably add a little bit, but not too concerned about that. And then I check the washer fluid. I'm glad they put a little screen in here. We're going to put a little fluid in here.
obviously because we live in Colorado, we need the cold protection. If you live in a warm state, you don't have to worry about that, but Colorado, always get the coldest protection.
I did top off the radiator. I had some, I used the correct, this is the red stuff. Use the correct red stuff for Toyota. This is pre-diluted. I just topped it off. So we're looking at a better level. I had a little bit left, so I just topped it off. But yeah, use the correct stuff. This is the red stuff for Toyota. You can use any brand, but make sure it's the red stuff for Toyota. And I just topped it off. Can have power steering. I checked this a while back, but it should be good. Put into the line, so we'll clean it off and wipe it off. And yeah, it's right at the line. It's a little high. And I also checked the fluid color too. And then smell it if it smells bad or smells burnt. So I wiped some on the on a clean spot of the rag here. Not too concerned because I drained it out. I siphoned this out of here about a year ago, and then I put some new fluid in there. So it's pretty fresh fluid. Next time I do an oil change, I'll probably siphon it out again. But we're good now. And then I check the transmission fluid. Obviously the proper way is to keep it in gear, and I'm just going to, there's a nice little spring-loaded lock, just pulls out. Pull straight out, and then I'll wipe it off with the clean part of the rag. And then just kind of fish it through there. If it gets stuck, just you may have to do it with a second hand, you know, to help feed it in. I don't know why they put these dipsticks on most cars. It's hard to get into. I wiped it off, and then I want to pull it out again and check the fluid, check the color. It's nice and dripping on my sidewalk. So here's the towel. And I don't smell any burnt. I don't see any debris. It's not black. It almost looks like cranberry juice. I'm also holding the camera, obviously, but as I was moving it, I couldn't tell. The stick's a little bit wonky, but I couldn't tell of any signs. And I had it recently flushed, maybe 5,000 miles ago. The way to check the level is to put it in gear. We're just checking the fluid consistency, and also too, if it's burnt, if there's any debris, if it smells funny. And I'll clean this up with a rag and maybe shoot a little cleaner on here just to clean it up a little bit. There's a little spring that holds it into place. So I'm pretty happy with that. We checked washer fluid, we checked radiator, we checked brake, we checked coolant. Brake fluid is good. Power steering. We just checked the engine level. We checked coolant. Now normally batteries, this is a maintenance-free battery, Optima. But obviously if you do not have a maintenance-free battery, make sure you check your water levels. And yeah, I can see we have a little bit of corrosion here, so we're going to hit it with some baking soda next. After you're done with your baking soda that you put in the fridge, I just take it to the garage, rip it open, and it works great for cleaning.
I put it inside the car, and I also put a fresh one inside the car. But works really good for instead of wasting it, you just put it on the terminals here. And then any of the corrosion areas. I don't drive this very much, so usually corrosion means that we got a loose connection. So pretty tight. Trying to wiggle it, trying to get some of this stuff in here. Then what I want to do is just going to hit it with the garden hose. Let that sit there for a little bit. But I used Optima battery because it's got 800 cold cranking amps. Obviously in Colorado it gets cold, so you want some good cold cranking amps. This is the 34R. I had to mount it, as you can see, and then I had to have a spacer down here. You can see this red spacer. It's maybe an inch and a quarter spacer down here that it sits on, and it comes with this spacer. And then I had to mount it in kind of, I guess, upside down. Pretty happy with it. I haven't had installed with it. It's lasted a winter season because I got this back in July 2020. So it's about a year old. And no issues. Like I said, I periodically check these, make sure they're tight, make sure the battery itself is tight. I'm trying to wiggle it, make sure the brackets, you know, the bolt is good. And then when I replaced this, I put some anti-seize on all the bolts. Put it here, and then I put it here. Copper anti-seize. So when I have to replace this again, then it's going to be easier to take that out, so it doesn't get all corroded. So then I also check to make sure that it's seated okay, that it's not leaking. And I'd probably recommend this battery. I was always a Die-Hard fan. Die-Hard's good batteries, but I wanted to try the Optima. If you guys are fans of Roadkill, Optima sponsors them, and they put those batteries through all, you know, on all kinds of cars that they run. I didn't buy it because of that. I just bought it high performance battery, and I wanted the best just because this is my daily driver, and I wanted the highest cold cranking amps and the toughest, most rugged batteries. So if I do have to go off-road, if I have to rescue somebody, or in the middle of a blizzard, I want my battery to, you know, be there when I need it. And I also check it. So I was able to get 7 years out of my Die-Hard. I garaged this vehicle so it's not out in the elements, and then I obviously check the fluids, check the levels in my Die-Hard, so I was able to squeeze 7 years out of it. Depends on the battery, 5 to 7. I don't push it farther than that because, you know, battery, I want it to start. So we're going to go ahead and hit this with a garden hose and hit the rest of the power washer. But so far looks good here. Let's go check the brakes.